They were told the Americans would rip children from their mothers' arms, that pregnant women would be sent to work camps alone, that families would be torn apart as punishment for Germany's sins. So when Margarete clutched her 3-year-old son closer as American soldiers approached their holding pen in Bremen, May 1945, she braced for the worst moment of her life. But the young American officer didn't reach for her child. Instead, he glanced at his clipboard, looked at her son, and simply asked in broken German, "His name?" When she whispered Klaus, the officer wrote it down next to hers, mother and child, together, one line on the transport list. What happened next would shatter everything these German women had been taught to believe about their enemy, because the Americans didn't just keep one family together, they kept them all together, and in doing so, they delivered a truth more powerful than any propaganda, that even in war, some values remain sacred. If this story moves you, please hit the like button and subscribe. These forgotten chapters of history deserve to be remembered. The war ended on May 8, 1945. But for the women of the Wehrmacht auxiliaries, the real fear began the next morning. Margarete had served as a radio operator in Hamburg. Her husband, a Luftwaffe pilot, had died over Britain in 1943. She'd raised Klaus alone while working for the military, typing reports and coordinating communications. When the Reich collapsed, she found herself among thousands of women classified as military prisoners. The holding area in Bremen was chaos. Women and children packed together in what used to be a warehouse. Some women held infants. Others were visibly pregnant, their bellies swollen beneath threadbare coats. A few elderly women clutched photographs of sons and husbands they'd never see again. Everyone whispered the same fears. "They will take the children," one woman kept saying, rocking back and forth. "That's what they do. They will take them, and we'll never see them again." This wasn't baseless panic. For years, Nazi propaganda had painted Americans as monsters who would commit unspeakable acts. The Goebbels machine had told them that American soldiers were barbarians, that they showed no mercy, that they especially targeted the vulnerable. And now, with Germany in ruins and their protectors gone, these women had no choice but to believe the worst. Margarete held Klaus so tight he squirmed. He was only 3 but seemed to sense his mother's fear. She'd packed a small bag, just a change of clothes for him, a wooden toy soldier his father had carved, and a photograph of their family when times were better. Everything else had burned in the Hamburg firebombing. On May 15th, American soldiers entered the warehouse. The women fell silent. Some pushed their children behind them. Others held babies closer to their chests. The fear was so thick you could taste it, metallic and sharp like blood. But the soldiers didn't storm in with guns raised. They walked calmly, carrying clipboards and papers. An interpreter, a German-American from Wisconsin, spoke first in clear, simple German. "You will be processed for transport to prisoner of war camps in the United States. Please form orderly lines. Families with children, to the left. Pregnant women, to the left. Everyone else to the right." The women stared. Families to the left? Together? It had to be a trick. A cruel way to identify who had children before separating them. Margaret's legs wouldn't move. Around her, other mothers stood frozen. The interpreter noticed their hesitation. He seemed to understand. He spoke again, softer this time. "You will not be separated from your children. This is American military policy. Families stay together." Still, nobody moved. The words didn't make sense. They contradicted everything these women had been told. Finally, one mother, holding a baby and clutching a toddler's hand, took a shaking step to the left. Then another. Then Margarete, swallowing her fear, joined the line. As they stood in line, American soldiers moved through, checking names against lists. When they reached Margarete, a young corporal, barely 20 years old, knelt down to Klaus's level. The boy hid behind his mother's skirt. The soldier reached into his pocket, and Margaret's heart stopped. But he pulled out a chocolate bar, a Hershey's bar, still in its brown wrapper. He held it out to Klaus with a smile. "For the little guy," the interpreter translated. Klaus looked up at his mother, uncertain. She nodded, tears already forming. The boy took the chocolate with both hands, staring at it like it was treasure. In 3 years of war, he'd never seen chocolate. The soldier ruffled his hair and moved on. That small gesture cracked something open in Margaret's chest. This wasn't the behavior of monsters. This was kindness. Unexpected, unexplained kindness. And it terrified her more than cruelty would have, because she didn't know what to do with it. 3 days later, they boarded ships at Bremerhaven. Large transport vessels that had carried troops to Europe now carried prisoners back to America. The women and children were assigned to separate quarters from the men. The families were grouped together in converted cargo holds that had been fitted with bunks. Margarete shared a small cabin with 5 other mothers and their children. The bunks were narrow but clean. There were blankets, real blankets, not the threadbare rags they'd been using. The air smelled of paint and disinfectant instead of smoke and death. The ship's engines rumbled to life, and Germany, what was left of it, began to fade in the distance. Some women cried, others stood silent, watching their homeland disappear. Margarete felt nothing but numbness. Everything she'd known was ash, her city, her life, her husband's grave, all gone. Only Klaus remained. That first night at sea, Klaus couldn't sleep. The rocking of the ship scared him. Margarete held him close, singing softly the lullabies her own mother had sung. Around her, other mothers did the same, a chorus of German lullabies floating through an American ship, carrying women and children toward an uncertain future. An American nurse made rounds each evening. She was middle-aged, kind-faced, and spoke no German, but she didn't need words. She checked on the children, making sure they had water, that they weren't seasick. When one baby developed a fever, the nurse stayed all night, bringing cool cloths and medicine until the crisis passed. The crossing took 8 days. 8 days of gray ocean, cold winds, and mounting anxiety. The women whispered constantly. What awaited them in America? Would they really be kept together, or was this all an elaborate deception? On May 26, 1945, the ship entered New York Harbor. The women crowded at the rails, children perched on their hips, staring at the Manhattan skyline. Buildings reached toward the sky, taller than anything they'd ever seen. Glass windows gleamed in the morning sun. Not a single one was broken. Not one showed signs of bombing. Klaus pointed at the Statue of Liberty as they passed. "Mama, who is that lady?" Margarete had no answer. She'd been taught that America was the enemy. Now, looking at this untouched city, this monument to freedom, she felt the first real crack in everything she'd believed. They didn't dock in New York itself. The ship continued south, eventually arriving at a military port in New Jersey. As they disembarked, carrying their few possessions, military police directed them toward waiting buses, still together, still in family groups. The buses drove for hours through countryside that seemed impossible. Green fields stretched endlessly, farms with neat white houses, towns with shops full of goods, children playing in yards, everything whole, everything alive. While Germany lay in ruins, America looked like it had never known war at all. They arrived at Camp Dermot in Arkansas in the afternoon. The camp had been built to house prisoners of war, mainly Italian and German men, but one section had been converted specifically for women and families. The fence was topped with barbed wire, yes, but the buildings inside looked sturdy and well-maintained. As the buses stopped at the main gate, Margaret's heart pounded. This was it, the moment when the truth would be revealed. Would they be torn apart now? Had the kindness been just a way to keep them docile during transport? The gate opened. The buses drove through, and they parked in front of a series of barracks buildings marked with numbers and letters. An American officer stood waiting with more clipboards. "Listen carefully," the interpreter said. "You will be assigned to barracks by family units, mothers and children together, single women in separate barracks. You will not be separated from your children at any time. Is this understood?" The women stared. One brave soul spoke up, her voice shaking. "For how long?" "For the duration of your internment. Families stay together. This is policy." Silence. Then, slowly, like a wave breaking, the reality sank in. They weren't going to separate them. Not now. Not later. The Americans meant what they'd said. A woman in her 30s, 8 months pregnant, began to sob. Not from sadness, but from relief so profound it physically hurt. Others joined her. Even Margarete felt tears streaming down her face, though she made no sound. Klaus tugged at her dress, confused by his mother's tears. Margarete and Klaus were assigned to Barrack 7, Room 3. They shared the space with 2 other mothers and their children, Anna, who had twin girls age 5, and Helga, whose son was 7 and whose husband had been captured on the Eastern Front. The room was simple but clean. 4 bunks, a small table, a pot-belly stove for heat. A window with actual glass, not boards or paper. Each bunk had a mattress, a pillow, and 2 blankets. After years of bombing shelters and refugee centers, it felt like a palace. But the real shock came when they were told to report for processing and medical checks. Margarete held Klaus's hand tightly as they walked to the medical building, still certain this was where the separation would happen. Instead, the American doctor examined them together. He checked Klaus for lice, for malnutrition, for any signs of disease. He was gentle, speaking through the interpreter, explaining everything he was doing. When he found that Klaus was underweight and anemic, he didn't separate them. He simply wrote notes and said the boy would receive extra milk and vitamins with his meals. "We'll have him healthy in no time," the doctor said, smiling. "You'll see." After medical checks came the real shock, the showers and delousing. Margarete had expected humiliation. She'd heard stories from other refugees about forced strip searches, guards watching, degradation as policy. But the women were directed to a clean facility with private shower stalls, hot water, real soap that smelled like flowers, shampoo for their hair, clean towels waiting, and most importantly, mothers and children showered together in family stalls. Nobody watched, nobody mocked. The female American staff simply provided supplies and clean clothes and left them to their privacy. Klaus laughed as hot water poured over him. It was the first time he'd had a hot bath in memory. Margarete scrubbed him clean, washing away months of dirt and fear. When she washed her own hair, watching the filth swirl down the drain, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. That evening, they were directed to the mess hall, a large building with long tables and benches. The smell hit them first: real food cooking, bread baking, meat simmering, coffee brewing. After years of turnip soup and sawdust bread, the aroma was overwhelming. They lined up with trays. American cooks, some of them German or Austrian immigrants, served the food. The portions were generous: beef stew with actual chunks of meat, mashed potatoes, carrots, fresh bread with butter, milk for the children, coffee for the adults. Margarete carried her tray and Klaus's to a table, hands shaking. She sat down and stared at the food. Around her, other women did the same. Some cried, some laughed in disbelief, some simply sat frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. Klaus picked up his spoon and dug into the potatoes immediately. After his first bite, his eyes went wide. "Mama, it's good. It's really good." Margarete tasted the stew. The meat was tender. Real beef, not horse or rat. The vegetables were fresh. The bread was soft and white, not black with fillers. She closed her eyes and forced herself to chew slowly, trying to make it last, trying not to weep. At the next table, a young mother nursed her infant while eating. Nobody stopped her. Nobody said anything. An American guard walked by, glanced at her, and kept moving. The simple acceptance of motherhood, the acknowledgement of a child's needs, felt revolutionary. After the meal, they were given dessert. Apple pie with a scoop of vanilla ice cream. Klaus had never tasted ice cream. His face, when the cold sweetness hit his tongue, made Margarete laugh for the first time in months. A real laugh, not bitter, not forced, just joy at seeing her son experience something beautiful. That night, back in their barracks, the women talked in low voices while the children slept. Anna, the mother of twins, kept shaking her head. "I don't understand," she whispered. "We were told they would torture us, that they hated German women, that they would take our children for adoption in American families. None of it is true." Helga, who had worked in a military hospital, had a harder edge. "It's strategy. They're softening us, making us grateful. Tomorrow, or next week, or next month, they'll show their true faces." But Margarete wasn't so sure. She'd seen the doctor's genuine concern for Klaus. She'd felt the warmth of the shower water. She'd tasted real food. These weren't the actions of people planning cruelty. These were the actions of people following rules, policies, values that seemed to matter more than revenge. "Maybe," Margarete said quietly, "we were lied to. Maybe everything we were told about them was a lie." The other women fell silent. It was a dangerous thought. To admit they'd been deceived meant admitting everything they'd believed was false. It meant questioning the Reich, the propaganda, the war itself. It was easier to believe the Americans were playing a long game than to face that truth. But, as Margarete lay in her bunk, Klaus sleeping peacefully beside her for the first time in weeks, she couldn't deny what she'd seen. The Americans had kept their word. Families together, children safe. That wasn't deception. That was something else entirely. Within a week, a routine established itself. Morning bell at 6:30, breakfast at 7, Sears. Children attended makeshift schools set up in converted buildings. Mothers worked light duties, laundry, cleaning, kitchen help, or simply cared for younger children. Lunch at noon, afternoon recreation time, dinner at 6, SARS, lights out at 10, MAR. The work was voluntary, not forced. Women who were pregnant or caring for infants weren't required to work at all. Those who did work received small wages in camp script that could be spent at the canteen for candy, cigarettes, toiletries, or small luxuries. Klaus attended the children's program. An American teacher who spoke German organized activities. Simple lessons in reading and math, games, songs, outdoor play. The children were given regular snacks, milk, and cookies in the afternoon. They gained weight rapidly, their hollow faces filling out, their energy returning. Margarete watched her son transform. Within 2 weeks, he looked like a different child. His cheeks had color, his eyes sparkled. He played with other children, laughing and running. For the first time in his young life, he wasn't hungry, wasn't cold, wasn't afraid. The treatment of pregnant women revealed the Americans' true commitment to family unity. There were about 30 pregnant women in the camp, in various stages of pregnancy. They received special medical attention, regular checkups, vitamin supplements, and extra food rations. When women went into labor, they were transported to a civilian hospital in the nearby town. American doctors and nurses delivered the babies with the same care they'd give any patient. The women stayed in the hospital for several days, then returned to camp with their newborns. Margarete befriended one of these women, Greta, who'd been 8 months pregnant when they arrived. Greta gave birth to a healthy girl in early June. When she returned to camp, the American staff had prepared a special welcome. A cradle, baby clothes, diapers, formula, bottles, everything a new mother might need. Greta wept when she saw it. In Germany, I would have given birth in a cellar. If we'd survived the birth, we'd have nothing. No food, no supplies, nothing. Here, they give me everything. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The enemy was providing better care than their own country ever had. It was a truth that cut deep. Mail began arriving in July, letters from Germany, from family members who'd survived. The Red Cross helped facilitate communication. What the women read broke their hearts. Margarete received a letter from her mother, who was living in the ruins of Hamburg. The letter was 3 pages of desperation. Food was scarce. Her mother was eating 1 meal a day, often just bread and water. The black market demanded impossible prices. People were starving. Children begged in the streets. Disease was spreading. If you can send anything, please do, her mother wrote. Even a little food. We are so hungry here, but I am glad you and Klaus are safe, even if you are prisoners. At least you are alive. Margarete sat in the mess hall that evening, staring at her full plate. Beef, potatoes, vegetables, bread, butter. More food in 1 meal than her mother saw in a week. The guilt was crushing. She wasn't alone. Other women received similar letters. Stories of starvation, homelessness, desperation. The contrast between the suffering at home and their relative comfort in the camp created a painful paradox. They were prisoners, yes, but they were eating better, sleeping safer, living healthier than their families in Germany. Anna summed it up one night. How do I tell my mother that my daughters have gained weight? That they smile now? That they have toys and books? How do I write that while she's digging through rubble for food? There was no good answer. The women could send packages through the Red Cross, but it took months, and most items didn't survive the journey. All they could do was write letters of reassurance and carry the weight of their guilt. The relationship between the prisoners and guards evolved slowly. At first, the women kept their distance, uncertain and afraid. But the guards, many of them young men who'd missed combat, treated them with basic decency. Some guards had German heritage themselves. Their grandparents had immigrated from Germany generations ago. They spoke bits of German, shared candy with the children, told stories about their own families. One guard, Corporal Miller, took a particular interest in Klaus. He'd had a son who died of pneumonia before the war. Klaus reminded him of his boy. He'd slip Klaus extra cookies, teach him simple English words, play catch with a baseball during recreation time. Margarete watched these interactions with mixed feelings. On one hand, she was grateful for any kindness shown to her son. On the other, it felt disloyal somehow to accept friendship from the enemy. But Klaus didn't see enemies. He just saw a nice man who played with him and made his mother smile. And slowly, Margarete stopped seeing an enemy soldier and started seeing just a man, grieving his own loss, finding comfort in making a child happy. The camp canteen became a strange symbol of their captivity. With their work wages, the women could buy things they hadn't seen in years: chocolate bars, chewing gum, toothpaste, soap, shampoo, writing paper and pencils. Simple things that had become luxuries in wartime Germany. For the children, it was wonderland. Klaus's eyes would go wide every time Margarete took him to the canteen. Shelves of candy, toys, coloring books. She'd buy him one small thing each week, watching his joy, feeling the guilt twist in her stomach. Helga, the skeptical one, pointed out the cruelty of it. They give us just enough to make us comfortable, to make us forget who we are. It's manipulation. But was it? The Geneva Convention required humane treatment of prisoners. The Americans were following rules, international law. They weren't doing this to manipulate. They were doing this because their values, their laws, demanded it. That realization, when it came, was harder than any punishment could have been. By August, 3 months into their captivity, the mental and emotional transformation was undeniable. The women had arrived believing they were in the hands of monsters. Now they lived in conditions better than most German citizens were experiencing at home. Margarete struggled with this daily. Every morning she watched Klaus run to his classes, healthy and happy. Every meal she ate food she couldn't have afforded in Germany even before the war. Every night she slept in a warm bed without fear of bombs or soldiers. The propaganda had been so complete, so total, that accepting the truth felt like betrayal. She'd been taught that Germans were superior, that the Reich was justified, that their enemies were subhuman. But here she was, a prisoner of those enemies, and they were treating her with more humanity than her own government ever had. One night, unable to sleep, she wrote in a small diary she'd bought at the canteen, "I thought they would separate us. I thought Klaus would be torn from my arms and I'd never see him again. This fear consumed me, but they kept us together. Not just us, all of us. Every mother and child, even the pregnant women, they cared for them, helped them, kept them safe. What kind of enemy does this? What kind of monsters show such mercy? Unless they are not monsters at all, unless we were the ones who were lied to." The barracks at night became places of whispered confessions. Women who had lost husbands, brothers, fathers in the war began questioning everything. If the Americans were as humane as they appeared, what did that say about the war? About Germany's cause? Anna, mother of the twin girls, had been a true believer. Her husband was still fighting somewhere on the Eastern Front, as far as she knew. She'd supported the Reich completely. But now, watching her daughters thrive in American captivity, doubts crept in. "We were told America was weak," she said one night. "That democracy made them soft, that they had no will to fight. But look at this place. Look at their wealth, their organization, their power. We were told lies, all lies." Helga remained resistant the longest. She needed to believe the Americans had ulterior motives. "They're fattening us up," she insisted. "Building trust. When the time comes, they'll use us somehow. Propaganda tools, forced labor, something." But even Helga's resistance crumbled in September when her 7-year-old son needed an emergency appendectomy. The camp doctor recognized the symptoms immediately. The boy was rushed to the hospital. American surgeons operated. He recovered in a clean hospital room with his mother at his bedside the entire time. The Americans even arranged for extra food to help him regain his strength. When Helga returned to camp, she was quiet. A week later, she admitted, "They saved my son's life. They didn't have to. He's just another German child. But they treated him like he mattered, like his life had value. I can't hate them anymore. I don't know what to feel, but I can't hate them." The children adapted fastest. They had less ideological baggage, fewer years of propaganda to unlearn. To them, the Americans were just the people who gave them food, taught them songs, played games with them. Klaus began speaking English phrases. "Thank you," "please," "good morning." He'd wave at the guards and call them by name. He didn't understand that he was supposed to see them as enemies. He just saw people who were kind to him. One day in October, Klaus came back from his class excited. "Mama, Mama, Teacher Sarah said when the war is over, maybe we can stay in America. Can we? Can we stay?" The question hit Margarete like a punch. Stay in America? Leave Germany forever? 6 months ago, the idea would have been unthinkable. But now, what did Germany have to offer? Rubble? Starvation? A defeated, occupied nation with no future? She didn't answer Klaus directly, but that night she thought about it seriously for the first time. Here, Klaus was healthy. He was educated. He was safe. In Germany, what kind of life would he have? Growing up in ruins, carrying the shame of the defeated Reich, facing a future of poverty and occupation. The transformation was complete when she realized she was hoping they could stay. The Americans didn't try to indoctrinate them, but they did offer educational programs. English classes, American history, civics, all voluntary, but many women attended. Some out of boredom, some out of curiosity, some preparing for the possibility of staying. Margarete attended the English classes. The teacher, Mrs. Henderson, was patient and encouraging. She taught them practical phrases, how to navigate American life. But she also talked about American values, freedom, democracy, individual rights, the importance of the rule of law. These concepts were foreign to women raised under totalitarianism. The idea that government should serve the people, not the other way around. That citizens had rights that couldn't be taken away. That different opinions were not only allowed, but encouraged. One day, Mrs. Henderson asked the class, "What do you think freedom means?" The women sat silent. They'd never been asked to think about such things. Finally, Margarete raised her hand. "I think," she said carefully in broken English, "freedom is when you not afraid of government, of war, of tomorrow, when your child can laugh and you not worry." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "That's a beautiful answer, Margarete. And yes, that's part of it. Freedom from fear, freedom to build a life, freedom to make choices." Margarete realized with a shock that she felt freer as a prisoner in America than she ever had as a citizen of the Reich. In December, 8 months after their arrival, the camp commander called a general assembly. All the women gathered in the main hall, children sitting with their mothers, everyone anxious about what would be announced. The commander, a colonel in his 50s who'd always been fair but distant, stood at a podium with the interpreter beside him. He cleared his throat and began to speak. "Ladies, I want to address the question many of you have been asking. What happens next? When can you go home? The answer is complicated." He paused while the interpreter translated. The women leaned forward, hearts pounding. "Germany is currently occupied by Allied forces. Conditions there remain difficult. Food is scarce, housing is limited, and the infrastructure is severely damaged. We have been in communication with the Allied occupation authorities and the Red Cross about repatriation." Another pause for translation. Margarete held Klaus closer. "You will be given a choice. Those who wish to return to Germany will be repatriated when conditions improve, likely in the spring. Transport will be arranged, and you will be returned to your home regions. However, there is another option." The hall went completely silent. "The United States government, in recognition of the circumstances that brought you here and the fact that many of you served in non-combat roles under duress, is offering selected individuals the opportunity to apply for resident alien status. This would allow you to remain in the United States, find work, and eventually, if you choose, apply for citizenship. Gasps and whispers filled the hall. Margarete felt her heart racing. Stay in America, not as prisoners, but as residents? It seemed too good to be true. This is not an automatic right, the commander continued. Applications will be reviewed individually. Priority will be given to those with children, those with skills needed in the American economy, and those who have demonstrated good conduct during their internment. The decision is entirely yours. You have until March 1st to decide. That night, the barracks buzzed with conversation. Some women were adamant about returning. Germany was their home, regardless of its condition. They had family there, roots, connections. The idea of staying in America felt like betrayal. Others, especially the younger women with children, saw opportunity. In Germany, they faced an uncertain future. In America, their children could have education, safety, prosperity. Margarete lay awake all night, wrestling with the decision. Her mother was in Germany, alone, struggling. Could she abandon her? But Klaus, what about Klaus? In Germany, he'd grow up in poverty and shame. In America, he could be anything. She wrote to her mother, explaining the choice. The response came in late January. My dearest daughter, I know what you are thinking, that you should come back for me, but I am old and my time is limited. You have your whole life ahead, and Klaus has even more. Stay. Give him the future I cannot give him here. That is all I want. Stay and be happy. That will be enough for me. Margarete cried reading those words. Her mother was giving her permission, releasing her from the obligation of return. But it didn't make the decision easier. It made it harder, because now she had to choose not between duty and desire, but between two possible futures. In February, something happened that crystallized everything. Klaus turned 4 years old. The Americans, knowing it was his birthday through the camp records, arranged a small party. Cake, candles, presents, other children invited. It was simple, but to Klaus, it was magical. Corporal Miller gave him a baseball and glove. Every American boy needs these, he said through the interpreter, grinning. Klaus hugged the man spontaneously, wrapping his small arms around the soldier's waist. Miller looked surprised, then deeply moved. He patted the boy's head gently. Watching this, Margarete understood the final truth. The Americans hadn't kept families together as strategy or manipulation. They'd done it because it was right. Because their values, their laws, their sense of basic human decency demanded it. They saw mothers and children, not enemies. They saw people worthy of dignity, not objects of revenge. The propaganda had been so wrong. The enemy wasn't monstrous. The enemy was more human than Germany had ever allowed its own people to be. That night, Margarete filled out the application to stay. When the deadline arrived, about 60% of the women chose to return to Germany. They boarded ships in April, carrying what little they had, heading back to an uncertain homeland. Margarete watched them go, understanding their choice even as she'd made a different one. The remaining 40%, Margarete and Klaus among them, stayed. Their status changed from prisoners of war to resident aliens under the custody of the U.S. government. They were moved to a different facility, more like a refugee center than a prison camp. Over the following months, the women were placed with sponsors, American families, or organizations who helped them find housing and jobs. Margarete was sponsored by a Lutheran church in Wisconsin. The congregation helped her find a small apartment and a job as a seamstress in a local factory. Klaus started kindergarten that fall. He spoke English better than German now. He had American friends. He played baseball. He was becoming American, and Margarete let him. She wanted him to have that freedom, that future, that life. Years later, in 1965, Klaus found a letter his mother had saved from their time in the camp. It was written in December 1945, never sent, just kept as a record of her thoughts. We thought they would separate us. This was the terror that consumed every mother. They will take our children, we told each other. They will punish us through our children. We believed this because we had been taught that the enemy was cruel, that Americans had no honor, no mercy. But they kept us together, every mother and child. They fed us, clothed us, gave us medical care. They treated us better than our own government ever did. This truth is hard to write, harder to accept. We were lied to. About everything. About the enemy. About the war. About who we were and what we were fighting for. I watch Klaus play now, healthy and happy. I see American soldiers smile at him, give him candy, teach him words. These are not the actions of monsters. These are the actions of decent people following rules that value human life, even the lives of their enemies' children. The hardest thing to accept is this. The enemy showed us more humanity than we showed ourselves. They valued family when we were told to value the state. They protected children when we were told to sacrifice them. They lived by principles when we were taught to live by commands. I will stay in America, not because I hate Germany, but because I love Klaus more than any flag or homeland. He deserves a future. Here, he can have one. That is all that matters now. Klaus grew up American. He served in the U.S. Army during Vietnam. He married, had children of his own. He became an engineer, built a good life. His mother lived to see her grandchildren, lived to see Klaus succeed in ways that would have been impossible in post-war Germany. Margarete became a U.S. citizen in 1952. She always maintained contact with her mother until the old woman's death in 1958. The guilt never fully left her, the sense of having abandoned her homeland. But when she looked at Klaus, at the life he'd built, she knew she'd made the right choice. In 1985, at a family gathering for Klaus's 40th birthday, his daughter asked Margarete, now in her 70s, about the war years. Margarete told her the same story she'd written in that letter 40 years before. "What was the moment you knew you'd made the right choice?" her granddaughter asked. Margarete looked at Klaus, now a middle-aged man with gray at his temples, successful and happy. "The moment they didn't separate us," she said simply. "The moment I realized the enemy valued my son's life enough to keep us together, that's when I knew there was hope." And so the simple act of keeping families together became more than policy. It became proof that even in the darkest times, some values remained sacred. The Americans didn't separate mothers from children, not because it served some strategic purpose, but because their principles, their laws, their humanity demanded they not do so. For the German women who arrived in American camps expecting the worst, this mercy cut deeper than any punishment could have. It forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about who they had been told to be and who their enemies actually were. The propaganda had painted Americans as monsters, but the reality revealed them as people who valued human dignity, even for their enemies. Margarete's story was repeated thousands of times. German women and children expecting separation found themselves kept together. Italian families, Japanese families, even some Nazi party members' families, all treated according to the same rules. Not perfectly, not without prejudice or hardship, but according to standards that respected the fundamental bond between parent and child. As Margarete wrote in that saved letter, "They didn't break us with cruelty, they broke us with kindness, and that was the most powerful weapon of all." This is the story worth remembering, not just because it shows American virtue, but because it reminds us that even in war, even between enemies, basic human values can survive. Family matters, children matter, mercy matters, and sometimes the enemy teaches us what humanity truly means. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. These forgotten stories of World War II need to be told, remembered, and passed on to future generations. Thank you for watching and for keeping history alive.